and welcome to Jung at Harp. Today we're going to talk about the undiscovered self. I'm Deborah Henson-Conant, and I'm here with Kathleen Wiley. Kathleen is a Jungian psychoanalyst, and I am a composer and a performer. And I think a lot about creative resonance, and we have realized that what Jung has talked about and what I'm thinking about often can shed a light on each other. Is that right, Kathleen?
That is absolutely right.
Beautiful. Okay. And so today I wanted to talk about this blob of sort of the undiscovered self that I have discovered in myself recently, that there seems to be a whole part of me that I didn't even know was there. And at this point, I experience it as sort of a blob that is undifferentiated, kind of like a whole group of stem cells or something that has been arrested at some point and hasn't come into what it is. And so I'm really curious about this, and if Jung has ever talked about this, and what it is, and how I engage with this completely other part of me.
Yes. And so I'm thinking about, it's not just Jung, but the alchemists talk about the Latin phrase is massa confusa, the mass of confusion inside of us. And I think about the blob as a mass of confusion. It's just like there's all this energy in there, but we really don't. It's like all tangled up. It's all mixed together. And we don't necessarily know what it is. It's not yet differentiated, meaning separated out, teased apart to see what direction things want to go.
Well, that's interesting, because I would say that this is different than that, but that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. This is not at all confused. It's just not, it hasn't even woken up. It feels like this, it seems to have the consistency of Play-Doh on all dimensions. Play-Doh, no, is it Play-Doh? Whatever, not Play-Doh, but there's something, it's just completely, there's no differentiation, there's no tangle, there's nothing. It simply hasn't even begun to wake up and find out what it is.
So in a way, what you're saying is it's kind of like lifeless still.
It's lifeless, right, but it's not uninterested.
Or dead.
I wouldn't say it's dead yet.
Yeah, it's just
it's not, it's like just hasn't, it hasn't woken up on so many levels you can't even imagine. And it hasn't woken up on every level.
Well, that's interesting. I think what I'm wondering, is it that the blob hasn't woken up, or that the ego, the self that you are, does not yet have any awareness of the energy that's in it?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it makes me think about, when there's an alien or an alien being or whatever it is, and we think, like, I remember when I was a kid, and they would always say, there's no possibility of life, on this planet. And I'd be like, well, what if life is completely different? What if it is doesn't look like life to us? And finally we'll hear like life as we know it. And I was like, you're right. But we may completely be unaware. It may look like a blob to us.
Right. Yeah, that's what I wonder, because the fact that you're even interested in getting to know it, and the fact you're aware of it, would indicate there's some energy stirring in it to have called your attention to it.
That's true. And I get the sense it's interested in me as well. I mean, I have a feeling it probably is having the same feeling, like, what? Something?
Right. So perhaps the confusion only lies between your conscious knowing about it and its knowing of you more directly.
Okay, I'm also kind of embarrassed. I'm like, whoa, we're going into this sort of, but this is my experience, and I'm really curious what will bring it alive. And the funny thing is, I have a funny feeling that regimentation is something that this thing is very interested in.
So it needs a structure in order to feel safe to come out.
Yeah, or that it even might needs a structure in order to know how to come out.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Almost like there's a labyrinth that we need to build to bring that out of us.
One of the things that I'm thinking about, and that Jung talks about, how we are not born a blank slate. Jung did not believe we were born a blank slate. He believed that we were born with energies already existent in us. Number one, partly because we were human. And so that there's this whole, what he called the collective unconscious, where we get, I like to think of it as like there's this vast ocean of all of these energies that are at work in us unconsciously, meaning we have no ego consciousness of them. We're not in charge of them. We don't call them up. We don't activate them. They're just there doing their thing. It's kind of like the archetypes and the instincts are fish in the water, you know? And the archetypes are the more spiritual energies that come up as longings and yearnings, and things that we associate with spirit, fire that moves around without form. And then the instincts are things that we feel in our body with impulses, and they have like automatic reflexes built in already. So mating, for instance, is an instinct. It's developmentally, there's an instinct that prompts people to want to mate. We see that all the time. So I think part of what I'm wondering about is, if this experience you're having, is that there's still some energy there for you that wants you to have a personal relationship with it, and that wants you to build that structure you were talking about, that labyrinth, to let that energy flow out into you and through you.
Well, it's fun. Two things are coming up.
Yeah.
First of all, one of my first thoughts is, well, wait a second, it is me. So,
Right.
or what is me and what isn't me? And then the other thing is, I just want to get some practical clarity on this. When Jung says we're born with this stuff, like, I mean, I probably don't really remember this, but I think I remember hearing my parents singing when from inside the womb.
Okay.
So I mean, I know that, I mean, the womb is kind of like an egg. Anyway, I mean, like, when does he mean we're not, when we're born, like come out of the womb, or we're born as in like when we, like start differentiating?
No, when we're actually in utero.
Okay, so when we achieve consciousness, maybe.
Right, right. Well, it's not, well, I wouldn't say it that way, although I think I understand why you're saying it that. I think that what I would say is that um, there are certain things that we are born with because we're born human. And developmental psychology and neuroscience are showing that there are just certain, you mentioned stem cells earlier, there are certain things that are just like in our DNA. Part of what we also know gets encoded into the cellular consciousness while the infant is in utero are our experiences vis-a-vis the mother's body. So the fact that you did hear your mother singing when you were in utero, you didn't hear it with the same kind of physical senses you hear now, but you did hear it
Really?
with the essence and all of the potential inherent in the seed that you were in the womb.
And my father's voice, by the way.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I don't know what that would sound like, but it'd be interesting to see. Okay, but I think that may be a technicality. I think what you're saying is we're not a blank slate. We're not a blob when we're born, and and whether that comes before we're even born, or whether it comes through the experience, that 9 months, or who the heck knows. Um, uh, once we enter the world, there's a lot going on already.
Yes. Yeah, once we enter the world, there's a lot going on already. And, I'm thinking about music for a minute. I'm thinking about your composing. And I'm thinking about improvising. So I'm thinking about composing and improvising. I'm thinking about times I've sat down really tired and thought, I don't have any energy to play my harp. But if I can let myself sit and do some breathing and center, then I can move my hands to the harp and find an expression that's congruent with what's inside. To me, that is an example of taking what might be an undifferentiated blob, an undiscovered bit of what I am in that moment, and making that labyrinth, that way for it to flow out. And part of what happens in that process is that there is something of one's own nature then one gets to know in a more conscious, intentional, focused way.
That makes perfect sense. And as you're saying it, I'm realizing, oh, right, that's what I talk about. That's what I realized after, and sorry for the background noise here, some things being built. But that's something that I realized when I first started working with the strings of passion. My first intention was to break it down, to differentiate it, to differentiate the process of going of creative impulse to creative expression. But what I realized, the surprise for me was that once I started engaging those principles of, bringing character and structure and roles and practice and bringing all those things to myself through my fingers and through my instrument, I began to connect to an instrument inside me that was a mirror image of what I was doing on the outside. And it became really clear that what I do with my hands and my body, it activates something that's inside of me. And for example, even if I'm working with a spreadsheet and I'm working, I'm taking the figures that my bookkeeper gives me each week and I'm putting them in my own system so I can, see like, projecting, whatever's happening. That seems to actually engage my brain in a certain way. Like looking at financial numbers seems to affect how I engage with them. Looking at things seems to, anyway, I feel like I'm just saying what you were saying, is that there's a resonance inside of us, which I call creative resonance, that comes from our engagement.
Yes. And there's a creative resonance that wants our engagement. So you're saying that blob in you wants to engage you too, that there is this reservoir of energy, is how I like to think about it, that at any given time, we are so much more than we have any idea about. And when we can begin to embrace that there's the me I know, and then there's this me I don't know. And it's all me.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I started identifying this, like, whoa, what's that? I mean, not my exact next thought, but one of the next thoughts was, wonder how many more of these there are. And you're kind of suggesting there might be a lot of them.
There might be.
So going to Jung, would you talk to me about the undiscovered self? Like, what does it, because when I brought this out to you, you said, oh yeah, Jung talks about that in this way. And so would you be willing to just sort of talk about that and what Jung has to say about that, and then how you experience that in your work?
Well, I think we already are, because what Jung was alluding to is that there are these other energies in us that want to be in relationship to us and that want to find conscious avenues of expression. And, that can be different that's different for every individual person, So, for instance, you work with a lot of harpists who come to the harp as adults. I know you also work with a lot of lifetime professional career harpists also who want to find a new passion for their playing. So it's both and. But I want to suggest that the adult student, for instance, has a journey of discovering an inner harpist that perhaps they never ever had any idea of, whereas the career harpist knows there's been a harpist there since 12. They may not like that harpist anymore at 55. They may have decided. And so now for that harpist at 55, it may be a need to discover that the harp can be for their own playing instead of whatever group or orchestra or symphony they're playing. But all of those are undiscovered, I like to call it pockets of expression. If we want to make it more technical, they're pockets of our own libido or psychic energy or life force. Libido is the same thing as psychic energy, which is the same thing as life force.
And it sounds like that could itself be a blob of, I mean,
well, it is the massa confusa. It is the big ocean. It's the ocean with all of these things in it. But when it's in the ocean, we can't see what's there.
Because the ocean, it is of the ocean and we're in the ocean. So is that
well, or we're outside of the ocean. We're either in it or we're outside of it. With, we know we can go literally in the ocean, scuba diving or down in a submarine, and we can see, or maybe we can hold our breath and do some deep dives and see some things. But it requires special instrumentation.
Oh, so you're saying the ocean of our subconscious in a sense.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. Because the ocean of the subconscious or unconscious is where the blob is now emerging from, that you even know it's there.
Oh, interesting. But it's a different, so the ocean of unconsciousness it's a different dimension. It's not literally below us. It's like deeper inside.
It's a different dimension. Yes. It's a dimension, a layer, if we want, whatever imagery or word works for you. Yeah.
So this is a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How many dimensions do we have as human beings, and how do we engage them? Because,
that's how that question could be answered many different ways from many different philosophical, psychological, and spiritual traditions.
Let's do them all.
So I'm going to do a simple one, which actually comes from the Kabbalistic tradition. And then I'll give you the classic Jungian model of psyche. For me, I like to think that we have 4 dimensions. There's the physical dimension, there's the emotional dimension, there's the mental dimension, and then there's the spiritual dimension. So I like thinking in terms of, okay, what's going on physically right now? What's going on in my body? What's going on literally with my sensations, my environment? What's physical? What's going on in the emotional dimension? Or sometimes I talk about it as the emotional body. So, what is the affective energy that's coming up? Emotion always has a feeling quality. It activates something in the body as well as activates some sense of what's going to be happening or is happening. And then there's the mental dimension, which is what we're thinking and how we're making sense of something. And also what our heart's desires are. Because the desire nature and the sense of our heart and the intellect form the mental plane.
Okay. So say that.
Yeah, our heart's desires and our intellect working together form the mental plane. That our mental body is not rationality and reason alone. Our mental body is the head with the intellectual rationality and reasoning capacities, but it's also the heart with what it values and how it experiences the whole. And it's also the gut with what we know from all of our instinctive wisdom.
Okay, this is reminding me of a book, it was about the mind, and it was helping me it helped me understand that the mind isn't just in our brain. Our brain,
mm-hmm. Brain. That's right.
The mind is throughout our body.
That's right.
So I think that's okay. So I think that's what I'm hearing about mental.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you say those 4 dimensions again? There's the physical.
There's the physical.
There's
the emotional.
Oh, emotional, mental, mhm,
and then spiritual.
spiritual. Okay. Okay. I'm trying to remember why we're talking about this, aside from the fact that it's fascinating, like where it fits with what. Oh, well, because I asked how many dimensions. Okay, got it. All right. There, carry on.
Well, it's the dimensions of the self. And part of the reason that we're talking about it is because if we're going to get to know the undiscovered self, then chances are there are things in every dimension that we will be discovering about ourselves.
It's so funny because when you said that, if we're going to get to know our undiscovered self, like my stomach was just like, oh my God, I'm scared. I'm scared to know what that is,
Mm-hmm.
and excited.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so carry on. So there's the emotion, there's the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the basic dimensions. And I'm assuming there's other, like things like the sexual dimension or the musical dimension. Are those also dimensions, or are those facets, or
Well, I mean, I suppose again, it depends on the system and how you're defining words. I would say that the sexual dimension falls in every one of those. I would say the musical dimension has a component in every one of those planes.
oh God.
It's they're not separated out. There is this principle that in all of our expressions is some bit of our larger self. It's not all of ourself, but it's a bit, it's an expression of ourself. The same.
So what happens if we're not expressing a certain part of ourselves? What happens if we're not expressing ourselves? Let's say musically. Let's say that you've always wanted to. You've wanted. You have that feeling, but you're not doing it. What
Mhm.
happens to that dimension?
Well, that energy is then going to stay in the unconscious, and it will find another outlet. And sometimes blocked creativity finds outlets into self-destructive behavior. Well,
Hmm.
in fact, lots of any, not just creative energy, but when energy is not allowed to flow in the direction it wants to go, and we tamp it down because we deny it, we dismiss it, it makes us feel ashamed, we're scared of it, we've learned it was bad, whatever, or we just think, oh, I don't have time for that, it doesn't really matter. Then what happens is it stays in the unconscious, but that doesn't mean it dies. That doesn't mean it's not alive. It has energy that's going to find an outlet, and often that gives rise to what we call neurotic behavior.
Sorry, I'm thinking about putting squirrels into a bag. I don't know why. I'm just imagining if you put squirrels into a bag or anything, they're gonna eat their way, chew their fat. And so that's what I imagine happens if you don't actually give them an outlet.
I love it. I'm going to forever hold that image that when we don't find the outlet for our psychic energies, they're like squirrels in a bag. They create a lot of mess. I have to, my little dog Gigi is going to create a mess if I don't get her in 30
Oh,
seconds, and you'll
oh,
get to see Gigi.
okay, great. Well then, here I am alone on this.
Gigi.
Oh, hi. It's so funny because a minute ago I was going to say, Kathleen, your chair's kind of squeaking, but I think it was probably the dog.
It might have been the dog, or I might have been squeaking the chair thinking, oh, I'm going to have to go over there and get her.
I see. Okay. So she can stay. Um
Yeah.
okay. So we're here talking about the undiscovered self. And we're also talking about the blob, which is maybe the undiscovered self. And we've also described it as undifferentiated self. We've described it as energy. We haven't described it as a dimension, but I think we've described it as that it may give resonance as we discover it to a dimension. And we've talked about how engaging, like I have a feeling this sort of new part of myself is not necessarily an artistic part of myself, but it may be the other side, the more like the not the expresser, but more the impresario who then takes that the artist and is able to give structure to 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 that art so that it can engage with the world more.
Yeah, I don't know that this is what you were saying, but it made me think about how all energy is bipolar. It has all energy. Jung says this: all energy is bipolar, all archetypes. So that there is extroversion moving things out in the world, and there's introversion pulling things in. And in a way, what you're saying is you have a sense, perhaps, that this part of yourself that you're getting to know is a part of you that might pull inward a little bit. Structure pulls things in and contains it. Too much structure will squash it, but just the right amount of structure allows it to extrovert, to flow out. So,
because I always think of structure as the internal structure, internal flexible structure of a skeleton. So but that's interesting. Does it? And it's I don't know what makes us connect to our. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the physiology, but I'm sure people know. I'm not going to go into that. My brain is ready to be like, but wait a minute, do we really pull in or to structure? Actually, so I'm just going to listen to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see it, well, there's that basic principle of polarity that we see at work, and we see it at work literally in the body with metabolism. There's the polarity of tearing things down and things building back up. Digestion has those processes.
My gardener was talking about that. So let me ask you about this. Like he was putting a bunch of leaves on the ground, and I was saying, "Oh, did you just put there so that'll make more, for next year?" And he was like, "Yeah, you figure trees do that. I mean, they throw stuff on the ground, and then it gives them nutrients for the next year." And I was like, do we do that with our bodies? But anyway, sorry, interrupt. Carry on. I'm sorry. I had coffee this morning, but I will focus.
Well, I think what you're saying is, do we fertilize? How do we fertilize these different planes? Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah. And I mean, what comes to my mind is physically we fertilize with the food we eat and our exercise and sleep. I mean, those are.
You were talking about breaking down and how breaking things down then gives us, then nutritionalizes them. So that's interesting to me because in the strings of passion, the 7 strings that I've differentiated, going from creative expression to from creative impulse to expression, there's the second to the last principle is deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I've experienced it in art and music is that you can take anything anyone's created or that you've created, and as you deconstruct it, the more you deconstruct it, the more available it is to create more things that will be seemingly completely different and yet are coming out of that same seed, that deconstructed. It's a different idea than we were just talking about, which is as decomposing, that things that get decomposed can then support the next thing. Wow, there's so many things going around in my brain about this. There's the idea of structure. There's the idea of what I'm doing in my life, that how that helps undifferentiated parts of me start to resound and resonate with my life. And then there's the part of the decomposing, supporting, and feeding. And I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, we only have 10 minutes. And how do we pull this to help?
Well, so let's just talk for a minute about structure and deconstruction, and in relationship to the undifferentiated or undiscovered self, and the self that is becoming known. We'll refer to the blob for a minute as the self that's becoming known. That, in a way, part of what we have to do is begin to find a way to give some expression, which requires a structure, to the energy that's making itself known. So the structure might be sitting down and improvising on a particular mode.
Right.
The structure might be drawing a picture, the doodle art. The structure might be stream of consciousness journaling. The structure might be rearranging the office, but we have to give some structure for this energy to begin to find its way out here where we can be in greater, clearer relationship to it. So then we create something in the process, a structure. And maybe we start listening and it's not quite right. So then we begin to deconstruct. We begin to go deeper into, okay, here's these 3 phrases of music I've just composed. I really love this first one, but about halfway through the second phrase, I just am not as present. And then the third one, and we start to tease apart little nuances, subtleties, momentary subtleties. Which is what, by the way, I think Debussy did in La Mer. I looked that up this week and began listening to it. And there are these 3 segments about the sea and what happens to the sea at different times. And he deconstructed the totality of the experience of the ocean, the sea, in order to create a structure that really captured and expressed each of those things.
It's as you're talking about this, I'm seeing the words engaging, engaging with it, expressing with it, listening to it, and it's as you're talking about Debussy, it's making me think of when I decided to play Hendrix' Star Spangled Banner on the harp. And my first thought was like, well, I'm going to listen to Hendrix and I'm going to, deconstruct it. I'm going to, figure it out note for note, blah, 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 blah. And I was having a lot of trouble with that. And then suddenly I had this moment when I was like, expletive, expressive expletive here. Oh my God. All he's doing is taking the words of the Star Spangled Banner and creating a tone poem from that. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to actually learn anything note for note of what Hendrix did. I can go back to the same source that he went to, the words of the Star Spangled Banner, mm-hmm. and the way that he expressed them, and then I can take the same journey that Hendrix took without trying to follow footstep by footstep. And then I was able to just, do it. It wasn't difficult at that point. There was nothing to remember aside from the words and then how to express those words with music. Not even how to express, but then to let myself express those words through music and using the tools that he had, which were strings, distortion, and, and bending, and that so then I could follow his path mm-hmm. on the electric harp. So the other thing that you made me think of when you were talking about that was having a practice, and by engaging with Hendrix, with his version, listening, that was what opened up the doorway, even though the doorway opened by me realizing I can't, this is too hard. I can't do this. I can't. And then boom, the door opened to a way that was absolutely easy. Mm-hmm. But it definitely took engagement with my body and a tool. And I mean, I feel so emotional when I say this, that the harp or any tool, a hammer, a pencil, any tool that allows us to express ourselves in a new way, in a way that we can't just with our bodies, it becomes this, the word, and it enables it, is it empowers us. And my heart could break now for the what tools do in our hand, for our hands, and then for ourselves as expressors. so I don't know where I'm going with this, but the engagement, the expression, and then you talked about listening, or actually allowing yourself to um, become moved or unmoved by your own work. And then what do we have to do to then become moved by our own work? What do we need to change? And I guess that's the answer that I was looking for today, about when you start discovering this part of yourself, discovering that it's there, then how do you discover more? You engage with it in some way. If it's, you know, for me, it may be through an Excel spreadsheet, because that's the part of me that hasn't been explored. And through others, it may be through an instrument. And then be within that discomfort, create a practice that allows me to be within the discomfort of what I'm not actually expressing, so that I can then start expressing the truth of something I've been given.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how you're the tool. When you were looking to play Hendrix's version of the Star Spangled Banner and make it your version, then you were the tool. You were aware of what you were feeling in your body physically. You tuned into the emotion inherent in the tones. You used all of your mental capacities, your desire to be able to play that on the harp, and all you knew about harp technique, harp possibilities, etc., to then give expression to this energy, you know? And so you were the tool, and you worked on all four of those dimensions that I mentioned earlier and brought them to bear on this project, which was rooted in a desire of your heart.
Right. A desire to experience and to share the experience of Hendrix with the Star Spangled Banner. And it's so funny that often the first intention is pretty silly. It's like, oh, I want to be like Jimi Hendrix on the harp. But then and it was almost egotistical, but then when you get into it and you apply these things of engagement and expression and listening without criticism, and yet listening, is that moving me? Is it not moving me? All right, so what is the next thing? That then it starts becoming a very deep and powerful thing.
And any intention or thought we have, like, I want to be like Jimi Hendrix on the harp, is not silly. It's a communication of some yet to be known part of yourself. That intention was from that part of you that then you got to know more deeply.
That's right, because then that impacted what I learned from doing that, impacted my playing on every level. Everything.
Yes. Yeah. So there's nothing that we say, think, do, feel, or experience that is separate from who we really are. It all expresses some bit of our true nature, of our larger nature. Our larger nature being our historical self, with all of our personal history and all of those early childhood experiences that shape us, and our larger self, including all of those dimensions of ourself that are yet to be known, that still are part of the unconscious self that we are.
All right. So this is beautiful as always. And so I know what I'm going to do, this week on this. And I would, if I were to give something, and it's so often I find that it's the same thing, which is, I would say that whether it is that, that I or you are wanting to explore that undiscovered self that is an artist, or that feels like the artistry, or the more practical undiscovered self, that I am going to literally use a timer and spend time in a realm that I feel connects with that. So if it's an artistic realm, then I'm just going to spend time with an instrument, or singing, or drawing, or what it is. And if it's a practical realm, I'm going to spend time with spreadsheets and numbers and timers, and see what that gives me. And I'm going to encourage others to do the same. And so how about you, Kathleen? Oh, and I'm going to use checklists too.
I would like to say what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to those silly impulses and thoughts that come up, that either I hear myself saying to myself or I hear out loud. And I'm going to, instead of dismissing them as being, oh, I could never do that, or I don't have time for that, or whatever, I'm going to pay attention to them, write them down in my journal, and then begin to use the principle of deconstruction to look at possibilities that might help me take a step in that direction.
That sounds great. And I realize one other beautiful thing about our conversation is that I'm going to take something from you and put that into play. And it sounds like you're going to take something that I brought up and put into play. And this is the beauty of conversation.
That's right.
Thank you so much once again, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
Always an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And everybody, thank you for joining us.
Visit jungatharp.com for show notes, contact links, and to follow the ongoing conversation. That's Jung, as in Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, and harp, as in the many-stringed instrument.